McDonald's shares are up about 3%. Mitch Roschelle is here, along with Adam Johnson for The Word on Wall Street. Great to see you. Welcome back.
Great to see you, Maria.
So how would you assess the earnings period so far? We just got McDonald's, which was better than expected, but you've got Disney trading down and Uber.
The big disconnect to me is the prediction that we were heading into recession because of tariffs, and it didn't happen. Not only did it not happen in GDP numbers, but it hasn't happened in corporate earnings.
No, it hasn't.
Companies are figuring out how to deal with it. Publicly traded companies are dealing with the uncertainty, I think, better than smaller private companies. But look at McDonald's. McDonald's is a story of the resilience of the consumer. And the consumer is what's driving our economy.
Yeah, I mean, we're waiting tomorrow's tariff implementation for the reciprocals framework. And, of course, the president has been tough on certain situations like wanting the supply chains in America. That's why he's talking about a 250% tariff on pharmaceuticals. He cannot allow America to rely on communist China for 90% of our prescription drugs.
Well, about 53% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs they call them, that go into our drugs, 53% are made here. In other words, half of the stuff that really makes a drug what it is, half of that is made outside the U.S. And so the goal here is to, by
some people say it's 90% of the underlying components are made actually in China or India. So you're saying half.
Yeah, 53%, 33% from Europe, and somewhere around 10% from China. Now, that's if you look at all drugs together, both prescription and non-prescription.
Okay,
over the counter.
I was talking just prescription.
Which is the difference.
But I think the big disconnect here is that the most prescribed drug in this country is an antibiotic. And that's where China controls the production of the key ingredients. So, you go to a doctor for something, or you take your dog to the vet, the first thing they do is they write a script for an antibiotic, and guess what? It's coming from China. We found that out during COVID, and we still haven't done anything about it. The previous administration completely ignored it, and I think it should be a priority.
The president's also readying new tariffs on semiconductors, and this is another situation where these are critical items for Americans and for American companies. He wants to ramp up U.S. production here. Again, 90% of advanced semiconductor chips are made in Taiwan.
Which is shocking, and that's the one that concerns me. You can actually move pharmaceutical production to the U.S. fairly easily. Building fabs to create semiconductors, that is a very difficult task. It typically takes 2 to 3 years to build a fab. Now, we are starting to build them, but you look at what China is doing in Taiwan, and whether that's running naval exercises or building these land bridges, what are they going to do with those? That's very concerning. So I would much rather focus our efforts on building chips at home than necessarily worrying about the drugs. That's an issue, but let's get the chips made.
Well, the chips are important because we're using these advanced semiconductor chips in our military.
Exactly.
But the drugs are equally important, I think. I mean, these moves follow his executive order imposing tariffs on dozens of countries, including a 20% duty on Taiwan, home of Taiwan Semiconductor, the world's leading chip maker, supplier to Apple, NVIDIA, Qualcomm, AMD. And, of course, I mentioned that 90% of these advanced semiconductor chips are made in Taiwan. The president is turning the heat up on Big Pharma, of course. We just talked about this. Do you think a 250% tariff is going to move these companies to start shifting production to the U.S.?
I think it's going to get their attention because nothing so far has gotten their attention. And I think part of the solution to the offshoring to drive costs down, listen, once you go generic with a drug, it all becomes about cost. That's why they've been made in China. Why don't we make them in Mexico? Right? It seems to me the key to a North American trade alliance is to really figure out what's the best thing to make in Mexico. And I think it's pharmaceuticals. And listen, there's already tons of pharmaceutical companies operating down there, so they already have some infrastructure. I think that makes a lot more sense to us than having them made in China.
And, of course, President Trump is ramping up tariffs or threatening to do so on India within 24 hours, calling its purchases of Russian oil unacceptable. He's rejecting India's zero tariff offer at him, saying that it's not going far enough while accusing the country of fueling Russia's war machine. Your thoughts?
Well, this is where you're using economics as a lever for policy, and I think it's actually a stroke of brilliance. Yeah, just think about it. India is effectively fueling itself with Russian oil, and that is enabling Russia to fuel itself with capital to go out and continue its war, its unjust war against Ukraine. So, yeah, you start connecting the dots, and I think this is a very effective lever.
Well, then there's yields. Mitch, your thoughts on a 2.5 point move in basis points this morning in the 10-year? The president has narrowed its shortlist on Federal Reserve Chairman to 4 candidates. He said Kevin Hassett, Kevin Warsh are top contenders, while also adding that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is not in the running. I was not expecting Bessent to be in the running, to be honest. The president is also close to naming a new Fed governor to replace Adriana Kugler, who's going to step down the end of the week.
Yeah, well, she's going to go back where she belongs, I think, which is teaching college. I don't think we should have college professors in the Fed. I think we should have people from the private sector. But here's what's interesting. Scott Bessent, you mentioned his name. He is, the Treasury Secretary, in my view, has one primary job: selling U.S. Treasury securities abroad. These guys come from, and women come from Wall Street. Why? Because they're bond salesmen. So with all these trade deals that we hear about, the formula seems to be a $600 million, a $500 billion investment in the U.S. What if we also made the other country in the trade negotiations make a commitment to buy X billions of dollars a year worth of U.S. Treasuries? Because the free market is what's going to drive rates down at the end of the day, not the Fed. The Fed can shorten the short end of the Treasury curve, but they can't do anything about the 10-year. They can't do anything about the 30-year. And if we got the EU to commit to $500 billion for their central bank of buying U.S. Treasuries over time, I think that would do a lot to drive rates down.
Well, it's great analysis. The president has already gotten the EU and Japan and others to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in the U.S.
But it's undefined.
You're saying
right.
Specifically Treasuries.
Treasuries.
All right. Great to see you. Thank you so much, Mitch.
You bet.
Mitch Roschelle, Adam, you're with us all morning. We appreciate that. We'll take a short break and come right back. Stay with us. You're watching Mornings with Maria, live on Fox Business.